I returned home after a hard day's work on the construction site, dreaming only of sinking into my lazy boy chair, turning on Thursday night football, and drinking 6 cans of Lone Star beer. But that was not to be. It seemed that my wife Agnes, whom I had been married to for 10 years, had other plans. She wanted to talk. "Do you remember my Aunt Martha who lives in Arkansas?" she asked, standing between my chair and the big screen. "No," I replied, opening the first can of beer. "Can you move?" She stayed where she was, pressing herself against the floor and blocking my view. Fortunately, the commercial started. "Of course you remember her," Agnes insisted. "She married that doctor from Little Rock. I think you met her at a family gathering a couple of years ago." "I don't remember," I continued. Against my better judgment, I asked, "What about her?" Agnes smiled. She was glad I had joined the conversation. By my estimate, there were about 7.5 minutes left before the game started. So I wanted to get this pointless conversation over with. "Well, her son, Jimmy," she began. "Do you remember little Jimmy?" I glanced at my watch and tried to see the TV through Agnes's wide hips. "No," I said, finishing my first beer and opening a second one. "Well, Jimmy got into the University of North Texas and—" she began, but I interrupted her. "Who doesn't get into that school?" I asked sarcastically. "What? Who didn't get into the University of North Texas?" I finished my question. "That's not a real university." "That's not true, Bill. You know I graduated from the University of North Texas. Why would you say that?" Agnes seemed genuinely hurt by my remark. Yes, I knew she had graduated from the University of North Texas, and look what her degree had gotten her. Nothing. She taught history at a local community center and hadn't had a significant raise in years. "Sorry, go on," I said, losing my patience. I only had 5 minutes left. "Well, it's hard for them to raise enough money to pay for all this, and—" I interrupted her again. "I thought he was a doctor," I said. "Who?" "Aunt Martha's husband. You said she married a doctor. Why is it so hard for them to pay for college at the University of North Texas? It's a step up from community college." "Maybe because they're from another state," Agnes suggested. "Sorry, go on." 4 minutes. "Well, Aunt Martha thought that since we live so close to Denton, Jimmy could move in with us. That way, they wouldn't have to pay for room and board. We don't even use the top floor, and—" I interrupted her for the 3rd time. "Yeah. Okay. Whatever you say," I agreed quickly. We had a 4-bedroom house that I had helped build on land my father owned right after I got out of the Army. My father and I built it when Agnes and I got engaged. He had planned to give it to me one day, but we never got around to it. Agnes and I didn't have any children yet, but we talked about having some soon. Agnes was right. The entire upper floor was empty. "You mean everything's okay?" Agnes asked, surprised that I gave in so quickly. The truth was, I didn't care. But more importantly, there were only 2 minutes left before the game started. "Yes, whatever you want," I replied. "Oh, good," Agnes said with a big smile. As she stood there, I realized that wasn't all. "What else?" I asked. "I thought you'd need more convincing, but I knew you'd agree," Agnes said nervously. "And?" "And, well, I already told Aunt Martha that everything was fine, and little Jimmy is already planning the move." 1 minute. "When?" I asked, tossing an empty beer can into the trash can next to the coffee table and opening a 3rd can. "He's coming on Saturday," Agnes said, shrinking back. "This Saturday?" I asked as the opening theme song began to play. "Yes," Agnes admitted. I could see she was afraid I would change my mind. "Okay," I said, waving away the beer. "Now can you get out of my way?" Agnes climbed onto my lap and tried to kiss me. I resisted for a minute or two, then gave in and let her do it, then slapped her on the butt and sent her away. Agnes spent all Friday and part of Saturday getting the guest bedroom ready for Jimmy's arrival. I guess our old stuff wasn't suitable for little Jimmy, so she bought a bunch of things at Bed, Bath, and Beyond. By Saturday afternoon, Agnes was a nervous wreck. I didn't understand why she was so nervous. I wasn't nervous. Fortunately, Texas Tech won their game and UT lost. I was happy. When the doorbell rang, Agnes jumped up and shouted, "He's here! He's here!" "Yay!" I said without enthusiasm, staying in my chair and hugging another bottle of Lone Star. Agnes ran out of the room. I heard them talking at the door, and then they both headed toward me. When they entered the living room, to say I was shocked would be an understatement. Little. Jimmy wasn't little at all. He was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed at least 260 pounds, maybe more. But that wasn't the most surprising thing. Little Jimmy was black. "Hello, Uncle Bill," he said in a deep baritone. "Thank you for letting me stay." I stared at the stranger holding out his hand for a long time before shaking it. Yes," I replied. "Well, I'll show Jimmy to his room," Agnes said. I nodded, still stunned. When they left, I called out, "Agnes?" She returned to the living room with a questioning look on her face. "Yes, dear?" "Come back, we need to talk," I replied. Agnes blushed and nodded. "Okay," she said. "I'll be right back." I sat down and waited, trying to remember when I had met Jimmy, his mother or father, or any of Agnes's relatives from Arkansas. I couldn't remember anything. I had never heard Aunt Martha mentioned before. On Thursday evening, I had dismissed it, but now that little Jimmy was here, it was really bothering me. About 10 minutes later, Agnes returned to the room, out of breath and smiling. "I put him to bed. What did you want to talk about?" she asked nervously. "Who the hell is that?" I asked angrily, pointing upward. "My cousin Jimmy, I told you," Agnes replied. "You said he could stay." "No, I said some guy named Little Jimmy who just got into college could stay, not some grown man. Who is he, really?" "He's Little Jimmy, my cousin." "When did your cousin turn black?" I asked defiantly. "I haven't met any of your other black relatives." "I don't have any other black relatives," Agnes admitted. "Jimmy's adopted, Bill. I told you that years ago." "No, you didn't." "I'm sure I did." "I'm sure you didn't." "Well, Aunt Martha adopted Jimmy when he was a baby. Don't act weird because he's African American." "What about the fact that I make him feel uncomfortable because he looks almost 30 and plays for the Dallas Cowboys? I thought he was supposed to be a kid." "He is a kid," Agnes informed me. "He just turned 19 last month. Jimmy started college last year and will be attending the University of Texas in January." "January? Then what the hell is he doing here? It's October." I was starting to get angry. Something didn't add up, and I didn't like it one bit. "He needs time to get used to a new place and find a part-time job," Agnes explained. "He's a relative, Bill. We can't turn him out." At that moment, the big guy came back into the living room. "Hi, Agnes," he said. "My friends invited me over for dinner to welcome me to town. I don't have a car. Can you give me a ride?" "Sure, I'd be happy to," Agnes replied with a broad smile. "I don't mind." Then she turned to me and asked if I wanted to go with them. "No," was my only answer. I watched them leave and heard them drive away. 30 seconds later, I got up and headed for the guest room. Upon entering, I looked around the room and began rummaging through his things. There were no books, no school supplies, nothing else that indicated he was a student. On the dresser, I found several crumpled checks. I smoothed them out and was surprised to find that they were from fast food restaurants and grocery stores in Dallas, one from yesterday and another from last week. This was strange for someone who, according to him, had just arrived. I looked through some of the things he had brought with him and found a half-empty box of condoms, Magnum size, of course. I finished and was about to leave the room when I was suddenly overcome with curiosity and glanced into a small trash can next to the dresser. Inside, I found an open condom wrapper and a used condom. "Oh my God," I thought. He carried a used condom in his pocket all day? Then I thought of another possibility. Agnes blushed and gasped when she showed Jimmy his room. They hadn't been there for more than 10 minutes, so I didn't think that explained the used condom. I decided not to think about it for now and went back to watching sports and drinking beer. I must have fallen asleep in the chair. When I woke up, it was already dark outside. My head hurt, my neck was stiff, and my stomach, where dinner should have been, was empty. I wandered into the kitchen, turned on the light, and noticed that it was already 9:45. What the hell? Where the hell was my wife, and why hadn't she made me dinner? I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a cold slice of pizza left over from a few days ago. I chewed it and opened a bottle of Dr. Pepper. I took a sip and looked around the dark house. And then I remembered Jimmy. "Agnes?" I called, wandering around the house. I looked in our bedroom, then went up to the guest room. Nothing had changed. No one was home. I found my charging cell phone and called Agnes. I could hear my wife's phone ringing, which was strange because she should have had it with her. I looked for it and found it charging on her nightstand in our bedroom. Great, I thought. How am I going to get in touch with her if she didn't take her damn phone? I ate a couple more slices of pizza and switched from Dr. Pepper to Lone Star. I waited another hour and started to get really angry, so I did what I usually did in situations like this. I took out my guns and started cleaning them. The ritual of taking them apart and putting them back together calmed my nerves. It was a remnant of my Army days. I had just finished assembling my Glock 19X when the front door opened and my wife and her supposed cousin walked in, laughing and joking. When they saw me, they both froze, their faces contorted with horror. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked. Agnes glanced at Jimmy, who stood frozen with his arms raised in a universal "don't shoot" gesture that seemed to be understood by everyone except the police. We took Jimmy with us to dinner with some friends," Agnes reminded me. "But they insisted that I stay and have dinner with them. After that, we had a couple of drinks and had such a good time that I guess I lost track of time." "You forgot about my dinner," I said, letting her know I was angry. I put the Glock back in its holster and set it aside. Jimmy visibly relaxed. "There was pizza in the fridge," Agnes explained. "Yeah, I ate it." "Oh, okay, so you weren't starving," Agnes replied. Jimmy seemed to come to his senses a little and patted my wife on the shoulder. "Hey, I'm going to bed." I noticed that he didn't address me. I ignored him and he left the room. "Well, I'm going to take a shower and get ready for bed," Agnes said. "Are you coming?" "I'll be there in a minute," I replied. "I have something to do." When Agnes left, I locked the guns in the safe, except for the Glock, which I kept with me. On Sunday, I spent the whole day in front of the TV watching the NFL, so I don't know what happened with Agnes and little Jimmy. They didn't bother me, and that was fine. The Cowboys won, so I was in a good mood for dinner. Agnes brought me my meal when I asked for it and poured me a Lone Star halfway through the Sunday night game. I had to get up and pour myself another one, and I was just settling in to watch the second half when there was a knock at the door. Someone had ordered pizza. It was triple pepperoni and double cheese, my favorite, so I figured Agnes had ordered it for me. She wasn't such a bad wife after all. I ate everything except for 2 slices and crumpled up the beer box I had opened to check the listings earlier that day. I ended up falling asleep in the chair and woke up with a headache. I got up, went to the bedroom to take a shower and get dressed. I noticed that the bed was neatly made and Agnes wasn't in it. I didn't think much of it as she often got up before me. When I was ready, I went down to the kitchen and found her making coffee and heating up a couple of frozen Max's donuts in the toaster. We bought them in bulk, brought them home and froze them. That way they lasted longer and I didn't have to stand in line. Agnes smiled and kissed me as she handed me my first cup of coffee. I noticed that her robe was unbuttoned and open, and she was naked underneath. I finished breakfast and had just finished my second cup when Jimmy appeared, wearing only his boxers. Agnes hugged and kissed him for a long time, which was a little inappropriate for an aunt. I noticed with growing unease that her robe was still open. I muttered something and left them to eat breakfast. I had important things to do. I had been chosen as the Rotary Club's Man of the Year and was to receive a big award on Friday. I had to give a speech, so I had to rehearse and see how I was doing. I set up a video camera in my bedroom, stood in front of it, and delivered my speech to an imaginary audience. To be honest, it went pretty well. I mixed enough jokes and humor with more serious moments. I cut the speech down to 18 minutes, but I needed to cut it down to 15. I was on my fourth run-through when Agnes peeked into the room and asked why I was late for work. "I'm not late," I replied sharply, then looked at my watch. "Damn, I'm late!" I ran out of the room, grabbed my briefcase, and headed to the office, calling my boss to say I was stuck in traffic. It was a normal day, but I couldn't help thinking how strange it was that Jimmy was black. Not that there was anything strange about black skin, but there was something unusual about her cousin being black. Agnes has a younger sister named Ursula who lives in Denver. She's married to a guy named Trevor. I never liked him. He was from Boston and rooted for the Patriots. That was enough for me to dislike him, but on top of that, he was a handsome, smug, arrogant little jerk. At that moment, I couldn't think of anyone else to call, so I called him. Well, he said when he answered. "It's my brother-in-law. How's it going, Bill? You must be in a tight spot to be calling." "Yeah, well, that's true," I admitted. Not wanting to waste time with small talk, I got down to business. "Do you know much about Agnes and Ursula's family?" "Not much," he replied. "I met their good-for-nothing brother Abe. That's about it." "What about their relatives in Arkansas?" I asked. "Arkansas?" he repeated, clearly puzzled. "I've never heard of any relatives in Arkansas. Why do you ask?" "Have you ever heard of Aunt Martha from Little Rock, married to a doctor who can't pay for her son's tuition at the University of Texas and has a 6-foot-tall adopted son named Little Jimmy?" No," he replied. "I can't say I've heard of them. Do you want me to ask Ursula? She's here." "Yes, if you don't mind." He must have put the phone on speaker because I could hear their conversation clearly. "Hi, Urs," he said. "This is your sister's husband, Bill. He wants to know if you have an Aunt Martha in Little Rock." "Hi, Bill," Ursula replied. "I don't have an Aunt Martha, and I don't know anyone in Little Rock. Why? What's going on? Is this some kind of scam?" "Yes," I said, feeling the anger rising inside me to the point where it was ready to burst out. "You got it right. A scam that I'm going to put an end to." "That I'm going to put an end to," Trevor said. "What?" "Nothing," Trevor said with a laugh. "You need anything else, Bill?" "No, that's it," I replied. "Bye." I hung up and started pacing around the office. "That damn bitch!" I shouted. "How dare she bring that bastard to my house and try to trick me? Now I know what they're up to." I sat down in my chair, took a bottle of moonshine from the back of the cupboard, and poured myself a cup of coffee. "Now I just need to find out what they're up to," I said aloud, taking a big gulp. I left work early and returned home around 5 o'clock to a quiet house with no sign of my lying cousin. Agnes was in the kitchen preparing dinner. When she saw me, she looked up and stared at me in surprise. "Oh," she said, "it's you." "Sorry to disappoint you," I said. "Where's Jimmy?" "He had to meet some friends to pick up some weed killer," she stammered. "Weed killer?" I asked, scratching behind my ear. "What does he need weed killer for?" I began to suspect that they might be some kind of terrorist cell and that the weed killer was being used to make explosive vests. "Have you seen our yard lately?" Agnes asked. "There's more weeds than grass. He's studying the culture of debauchery." "Culture of debauchery?" I asked, wondering what kind of liberal programs they were teaching in schools these days. "Gardening," she corrected me. "Get your dirty mind out of there." "What is that?" I asked. "Plants," Agnes replied. "You know, how to grow all kinds of things. If he destroys the weeds, our yard will be nothing but dirt," I told her. Tell him we won't let him." "Okay," Agnes said with a smile. "I'll tell him." I was about to leave the room but decided to give her one more chance to confess. "Agnes," I said. "Yes, Bill?" "Don't you have something to tell me?" I asked. "I mean, confess." She looked at me for a few seconds. She buttoned her robe but didn't tie it. "I burned dinner," she said. "I'm sorry." "Is that all?" I asked. "Yes, I'm sorry," she said. I nodded, took a Lone Star cigarette, and headed to the bedroom to change. I noticed a smell in the house that reminded me of the skunk that had once sprayed our dog. A sweet, pungent smell. If it was Jimmy's cologne, the boy had strange tastes. I started putting on the sweater and pants I wore every night when it was cold, but decided to check on my wife and her so-called relative. I looked around the room but didn't notice anything unusual or out of place, so I went to get changed. When I returned to the kitchen to eat, Jimmy was already there. "Listen," I said, "don't spill that damn weed killer on my lawn. I like it the way it is." "What did you say?" he asked. "Herbicide?" I repeated slowly. "Agnes said you went to get some herbicide. Don't do that. I don't want my weeds to die." "Oh, said Jimmy, looking at my wife, who just shrugged. "Yeah, sure, whatever you say." Agnes handed me a bowl of reheated chili left over from dinner a few days ago. I grabbed the Louisiana sauce and another bottle of Long Star and went to the living room to watch football and eat dinner. The game was terrible. It was a blowout. By the middle of the game, I was bored and remembered my speech. I decided to skip the football and watch the video of myself rehearsing my speech that morning. I got up and headed for the bedroom. As I passed the stairs, I noticed that the skunk smell was even stronger. Maybe a dead skunk was suffocating in the attic or something. I grabbed the video camera from my bedroom, but the battery was dead. I took it to my study and plugged it in. When the camera turned on, I discovered that it had recorded almost the entire day. I must have left it on when I rushed to work. Oh, maybe it captured some evidence of what they're up to, I thought, and I flipped through the rehearsal recordings. The video was in fast forward and didn't change for a long time. All I could see was our empty bed. After a while, the image changed and I let go of the rewind button. I recognized those legs. They belonged to my wife, that cheater. "So that's what they were doing," I said out loud. "Well, at least they're not terrorists." I felt relieved. But then the realization that my wife had been cheating on me hit me like a slap in the face. She had the nerve to lie to me and bring that bastard into my home, keep him under my roof, behind my back, in front of my eyes, and right under my nose. At first I thought, fuck him. If that bastard wants Agnes, he can have her. I went back to the video to find more evidence and fast-forwarded. I let go of the button, and the video resumed from the moment they finished having sex, at least for the time being. "Do you think the cuckold has figured anything out yet?" asked Jimmy, if that was his real name. "No, he's too dumb to figure anything out," replied my loving wife. "I almost shit myself when I walked in the door and he saw me. I knew what he thought. Holy mother, he's black." Agnes laughed, then lit a marijuana cigarette, took a drag, and held the smoke in until she coughed. She passed the cigarette to her lover. "He's such an idiot," Agnes said. "We have fun almost nonstop, and he doesn't suspect a thing. You brought me to your friends on your first night here, and he didn't notice a thing. Believe me, we could have done it right in front of him while he was watching football, and he wouldn't have noticed. Doing it in the same room with him while he was passed out from drinking was the best," Jimmy said. He laid out the whole plan. They were going to arrange for me to get into an accident and die. Only it wouldn't be a real accident. Jimmy and his friends would make sure I was dead. Jimmy and Agnes would be in church in front of the whole community, so no one would suspect them of a crime. I have to admit, it was a good plan. I felt sick, turned off the video camera, left the study, and returned to the living room, where the game was just ending. I looked around for Agnes, but couldn't find her. I figured she must be upstairs with her cousin. I thought about getting my gun and going upstairs to end this nonsense, but then I had a better idea. A few days later, I had a plan. I suggested to Agnes that we take little Jimmy to the store to buy him some new clothes for the start of the school year. They both thought it was a great idea. I told her to take her time and not worry about my lunch. I'd grab something to eat myself. As soon as they were gone, I loaded my pickup truck with bags, tools, guns, and all our electronics, and drove away. My father had a hunting cabin near Tyler in East Texas that Agnes didn't know about. The drive took about 2 hours, but with stops for lunch and groceries, it took me almost 4 hours to get to the cabin and unload everything. I made a few phone calls along the way. First, I called my father and told him I was starting Operation Freedom. He assured me he would do whatever was necessary. Then I called the lawyer I had hired and told him to continue with the divorce proceedings. Finally, I called the bank and told them I suspected my wife's cards had been stolen and asked them to temporarily block them. I didn't close the accounts, as there wasn't much money in them anyway. I hated banks and kept my liquid assets elsewhere. About 30 minutes after I arrived and opened the first bottle of Lone Star, the phone rang. Seeing that it was Agnes, I smiled. I answered. "Hello, Agnes," I said calmly. "There's something wrong with my credit cards," she practically shouted. "Wrong?" I asked. "What's wrong with them?" "They're not working," she said excitedly. "I just tried them all and they're all declined. I bought $500 worth of things here for Jimmy. How am I going to pay for all this now?" "That's strange," I said, pretending to be stupid. "Can't you pay with cash?" "I don't have that much cash on me," Agnes shouted. "Talk to the salesperson and figure it out." "No," I replied. "I'm busy." "Figure it out yourself." I hung up and finished my beer with a smile. A couple of minutes later, Agnes called back. "Damn it, Bill, I had to return everything. Did you call the bank?" "No," I replied. "I told you I was busy." "Well, how am I going to pay for all this?" she asked. "I don't know, Agnes," I replied, trying not to laugh. "Do you think the manager will cut you some slack? Maybe little Jimmy will sell you to get the money to pay for it." "This isn't funny, Bill," Agnes shouted in anger. "You need to come over right now and fix this." "No way," I replied and hung up again. The silence was broken about 30 minutes later when she called again. "We've been robbed," Agnes shouted as soon as I answered the phone. "What are you talking about?" I asked, pretending to be stupid again. "The TV, the stereo, all the computers, everything is gone," she screamed. "Someone must have broken in while we were out and taken everything. Where are you?" "I left town," I told her. "What?" Agnes squealed. "Why didn't you tell me? Where are you, and what are you going to do about the missing things and my credit cards?" "I left town," I repeated, "and I'm not going to do anything. If you have problems, deal with them yourself." I hung up and decided I didn't want to talk to her anymore. Then I went to the ATT website and disconnected her phone. Almost an hour later, my phone rang. It was Dad. It promised to be interesting, so I answered. "Hey, Dad, did you do it?" I asked. "Yes, she almost shit herself," he said, laughing hysterically. "Great, tell me everything," I said. "Okay." I drove up to the house and rang the doorbell, Dad explained. At first, she was happy to see me. She tried to get me to call you because it seemed like her phone wasn't working. I told her no, and then I handed her the eviction papers. She didn't understand what they were for, so I told her that she and Jimmy were being evicted. "I'm sure she loved that," I said. "Of course," Dad replied. She didn't understand. She wanted to know how I could evict her from her own home. I explained that the house didn't belong to you or her. It belongs to me. I told her that you had moved out, and since you no longer live there, I'm not going to let her and her cousin live there for free. How did she take that? Not very well, and then this big black guy tried to attack me, Dad said. I introduced him to my friends, Mr. Smith and Mr. Vesson. Did you shoot him? I asked, secretly hoping he had. No, Dad replied. It wasn't worth the trouble. Okay, thanks for letting me know, I said, and hung up. The next day, my lawyer called and said that Agnes had been served with a subpoena. She had apparently fainted and been taken to the hospital. When she came to, she asked about me, but no one knew where I was. Some people knew, but they lied. I went into hiding for a while. Only 2 people knew where I was, my lawyer and my father. My father told me that Agnes had been kicked out of her house, that she had screamed and resisted, and that she had apparently moved in with Jimmy and his 3 friends. I was in no hurry to resolve the matter. In fact, the longer I waited, the harder it became for Agnes financially. She might even have had to get a job. Finally, after almost 2 months, I learned from my lawyer that she was contesting the divorce and had somehow managed to hire a lawyer to represent her. I had to go to court, so I returned to Dallas and checked into a hotel. I walked into the courtroom and was shocked to see Agnes. I hardly recognized her. She had lost a lot of weight and looked exhausted. She looked at me with hatred in her eyes. I was patient and let my lawyer do all the talking. Agnes tried to prove that the house belonged to her, so we provided the judge with evidence that the land and the house belonged to my father. I helped build the house, but he never transferred ownership to me. We only lived there because of his generosity. Then Agnes tried to claim that I had a lot of money. She was convinced that I owned a construction company. Unfortunately for her, the company also belonged to my father. I was just a hired hand, or rather, I was his hired hand. A few weeks ago, he fired me for not doing my job. So at that point, I was an unemployed drifter. The only thing of value I had that she could prove was my old beat-up pickup truck. We didn't file for divorce because of infidelity. Texas isn't a no-fault divorce state, but it's close. I never mentioned that Jimmy had anything to do with the divorce. In fact, I never explained why I wanted a divorce, so that became the next bone of contention. She wanted to know why I was divorcing her. The judge wanted to know, too. "Your Honor," I said, "can we be blunt?" He nodded and said, "No objection, proceed." No one spoke, and I continued, "Your Honor, I have come to realize that my wife and I have irreconcilable differences in our religious beliefs, and because of that, I can no longer be married to a woman with such abnormal moral beliefs." "Religious beliefs?" Agnes shouted. "What the hell are you talking about? I'm a Baptist just like you." "Son, I thought you said you wanted to speak frankly," the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," I agreed. "I do." "Then I suggest you do so. What are you getting at?" "Well, my wife cares deeply about her family," I explained, "and I have nothing against that. When her Aunt Martha asked us to take in their son, little Jimmy, while he was attending the University of North Texas, I didn't object." "Then what's the problem?" he asked. "Well, you see, Your Honor," I began, "I realized how different our ideals are when I realized that she sees nothing wrong with incest." There were several gasps in the courtroom. Everyone, including the judge, looked at me like I was crazy. "Incest?" asked the judge, clearly surprised. "Yes, sir," I replied. "Her cousin Jimmy hadn't been in the house 10 minutes, and she slept with him." At that moment, chaos broke out in the courtroom. My wife jumped up and started yelling at me. Her lawyer yelled at her. Jimmy and his friends raised a ruckus. The judge tried to restore order. He ordered the bailiff to remove Jimmy's cousin and his friends. Finally, he threatened to throw everyone out if there were any more outbursts. "Son, do you have any evidence to support this accusation?" he asked me. "I don't know, Your Honor," I said, scratching my chin. "I have a video that I accidentally recorded when they were in bed. I couldn't watch it all the way through, but you can take it if you think it will help." Agnes and her lawyer jumped up again, shouting something incoherent. The judge ordered them to sit down and be quiet. "A video of your wife and her cousin having sex?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor." "How did you manage to film them?" he asked. I explained that I was Man of the Year and all that. He asked me to show him the video, and my lawyer handed him the video camera with the tape inside. I sat down, and the judge watched the tape. He called the bailiff, and a few minutes later the video appeared on all the screens in the courtroom. My wife's lawyer tried to object, but the judge ordered him to sit down and be quiet. And then it happened. My wife had sex with her black cousin in front of everyone in the courtroom. "Does your client have anything to say about this?" the judge asked Agnes's lawyer. He looked angrily at my wife and then replied weakly, "Your Honor, he is not her cousin. There is no incest here." "Oh, so she just lives with some guy and sleeps with him behind her husband's back?" asked the judge. The judge turned to me and asked, "Do you want to change the grounds for divorce to adultery? You have certainly provided sufficient evidence that she was unfaithful to you." I looked at my lawyer and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, my client wants that." "Your request is granted," said the judge, then added, "Don't forget to file the necessary paperwork today." He turned to my wife. "Do you have anything to say before I grant the divorce?" "I don't want a divorce," my wife shouted. "Well, then you should have thought about that before spreading your legs for another man," the judge said, lecturing Agnes. "Your Honor, may I?" my lawyer asked. "Yes?" If you rewind the video to the 2-hour 27-minute mark, you will see an interesting conversation between Agnes and her cousin, who is her lover, which contradicts her recent statement. "Oh, really?" the judge asked rhetorically. We waited for him to rewind the video, then it started, and my wife cringed and hid her face in her hands. I struggled to keep from laughing. "I'm done with my husband," Agnes began, addressing Jimmy. "I would have divorced that bastard, but I like your plan better." "You mean a plan to kill him, take his insurance, his land, his business, and everything else?" Jimmy asked. "Yes, that's exactly the plan," Agnes said with an evil laugh. "But how are you going to do it without getting caught?" "I have friends in the criminal world," Jimmy said. "They'll kill him while you and I are in a public place with a perfect alibi. Then they'll dump his body where no one will ever find it." "Perfect!" my loving wife exclaimed. "I can't wait to get rid of that useless jerk." After that, I got pretty much everything I wanted out of the divorce, and Agnes was left with nothing. I didn't even look at her as I walked out of the courtroom. I left everything to my lawyer. After all, I'm paying the bastard for this. 2 months have passed since the dust settled after the divorce. Agnes was still with Jimmy. The money I paid her for support ran out, and Jimmy forced her to work, earning money on the streets of Harry Hines. I think she turned to drugs to cope with it all. The last I heard, Jimmy beat her up for not bringing in enough money. I started running and working out. I ran in the park near my house for several hours a day. When I wasn't busy having sex with all the young hotties at the gym, I spent my free time on dates. Well, if you can call having sex with Agnes's younger sister a date. Then one night, as I was getting out of my car in the park to start running, 3 men jumped me. I recognized Jimmy right away. "Well, I've been waiting for this day," I said as all 3 of them pulled out knives. "You deserve this, old man," Jimmy said. "You ruined everything, now we're going to ruin you." My first shot hit Jimmy right in the chest, and he flew backwards and fell on his ass. The second shot hit his bigger friend in the left eye. I had to shoot the third attacker twice. The first shot went right through him, but he managed to wound me in the left side. The last shot blew the back of his head off. I fell to my knees and watched as Jimmy clutched his chest for a few seconds before death overtook him. Apparently, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in the hospital. Agnes was sitting next to me. At least I assumed it was Agnes. She had changed so much that it was hard to believe she was my ex-wife. Now she was bald, toothless, emaciated, a cheap street whore with herpes. "Oh, thank God!" she exclaimed. "You're alive!" I looked around the room. "What happened?" I asked. "You killed Jimmy and his gang of thugs," Agnes explained. "One of them stabbed you. You lost a lot of blood, but you survived. I wanted them to give you my blood, but they wouldn't let me because of the herpes and all the other diseases I have." "Thank God," I muttered. "Luckily, my sister has the same blood type," Agnes said. "What are you doing here?" I asked. I wanted to continue. "And when are you leaving?" But I didn't say anything. "I'm dying, Bill," she said, wiping away a tear. "Can you forgive me? I know I was a fool and ruined our marriage for black men. You're the best man I ever knew, and I betrayed you. The doctors say I have no more than 6 months to live. Please forgive me so I can die in peace." I was a better man than she deserved, and I knew it. To tell the truth, I had already forgiven her. Damn, how could I have done that? "Get out of here, you dirty sick bitch!" I shouted. "Get out of here before you infect me with something incurable!" Agnes looked at me suspiciously. At that moment, her much sexier younger sister walked in. "Agnes, who let you in? I told you not to come here," my new sex friend started yelling. "Security! Get this bitch out of my man's room!" Agnes stood up and hurried toward the door. "Agnes, wait!" I shouted. She stopped and turned around, waiting. "Say hi to your cousin Jimmy when you see him in hell," I growled at the idiot. "I guess some people are more forgiving than I am."